Welcome to episode 10 of Coffee and Co-Read, your source for all things literary with Catherine
and Kristen, where we believe there's nothing better than a hot coffee and an awesome book. Join us for our virtual book club, where we take one book a month and dive into all the drama, adventure, and romance we can find.
Hey, Kristen.
Hi, Catherine.
How are you?
Good. I'm really excited. We're starting a new book today.
Yeah, I'm so excited. We're starting Shadow and Bone today. So, like we do with most of the new books we start, I guess we'll just talk a little bit about how we got into the series that we're talking about. So, I got into the series a few years ago through actually a mutual friend and coworker of ours, Ashley. I started with the Shadow and Bone series because I knew there was a show coming out, and I also knew that they were published first, and I do kind of love reading them in publishing order. But I read Shadow and Bone, then I read Six of Crows, and I did read the next book, King of Scars. I haven't read the most recent book yet, Rule of Wolves, but it is on my TBR, and I hope that I'll be able to read it soon. I have to say, I did love Six of Crows more than this series, Shadow and Bone, but I do just love the writing and the world that this author puts us into, and I think it's super interesting. So I do enjoy these books. I just, some of the plot lines I don't love as much as her other books, let's say. But that's getting into like spoilers that we don't really need to get to yet. So how did you get into it? I asked as the one that gave you the book.
Yeah, you actually gifted me the entire Shadow and Bone 3-book series as a box set for my birthday one year. Yeah. And obviously, whenever one of us gives each other books, we're doing it for a reason. Here, this is good. You should read it.
Yeah.
And I remember I unpacked it from the gift bag. I laid it on a table in my porch to remind myself to get it and read it. And it slowly moved into my living room, and it just the intention to read it was there, and it just didn't happen for a while.
Yeah.
So it's one of those books, you have a pile of books in your house that you want to read, and it just never happens. This was that. Then I saw the show came out on Netflix, and I decided to watch it because it looked like something I would like. And I think you and I even had a conversation about it, and you said yes. And then you read the book.
Yeah.
So I watched the show. I liked it. And initially I forgot that you'd given it to me and went to the bookstore to try and find it. Then there was nowhere to be found in the bookstore because everybody had bought it because of the show.
The show was so good, yeah.
Yeah. So then I went back home and I was like, hang on. I actually think I might already own this. And sure enough, I did.
That happens all the time. Yeah.
So I read it and I liked it.
Yeah. It's only fair because you got me into so many books through watching adaptations that you'd take me to the theater and you'd be like, we're going to see this, or you'd put on a show when I'd come over to your house, or a movie usually, because shows are a newer thing than but you'd put on a movie and be like, we're gonna watch this, and I'd be like, oh, guess I gotta go buy all the books in the series now. But yeah.
A give and take.
Exactly. So yeah, we're reading part 1 of 4 of Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. That's chapters 1 to 5. And we're also gonna just discuss the show a bit because we liked it, and obviously there are some differences, but we just want to just bring it up, kind of like we did with Discovery of Witches.
Just a heads up, we are not a spoiler-free zone, and things could get a little saucy. So, just a little bit about our author, Leigh Bardugo. She's a best-selling young adult author whose novels have recently been made into the TV show Shadow and Bone. Uh, there is currently one season available on Netflix with a second season in production. So Leigh Bardugo created the Grishaverse with the Shadow and Bone trilogy. There was also a Six of Crows duology, a King of Scars duology, and as well two sets of short stories. And she's still writing, so she's keeping the Grishaverse going.
Yeah, so Shadow and Bone is the first novel that was published in the Grishaverse. But you could also jump in with Six of Crows because it's two separate stories that don't really intertwine too much. So you could kind of start at either point. Shadow and Bone, though, follows Alina Starkov, who is a normal girl who's actually extraordinary. We love our tropes here.
We do love our tropes.
The Netflix Shadow and Bone show follows both the Shadow and Bone series and the Six of Crows series. So if you're going to watch it, you should read both if you care about that, or just jump in and start with the series because it's also a great starting off point. And yeah, since this book is a little shorter than the last one, we're kind of just going to talk about the series as well as we're going through.
Right. So, like we already said, this is week 1. So, we'll be talking through chapters 1 to 5, which corresponds to episodes 1 and 2 of the show. So, we sort of get a decent prologue in this book, which they call the Before. So, it's not called a prologue, it's called Before. And it starts with our two small children coming to live at a duke's house, claiming that they're orphan refugees of the border wars. And this is something that sort of, I don't want to say that it bothers me, but it sort of brought up questions for me all throughout this series, is that they are orphans all
Mhm.
the way through, right? Like, they're orphans. That's sort of a title for them,
Yeah.
right? But we never get much backstory at all. Actually, in this book, we get no backstory at all from their lives before.
No. And I think it's cuz they can't remember, but also in the show they kind of throw in a bit of backstory, I guess, where they like are talking about. I think Alina asks about the fold on a map, and then her, I want to say governess, but I don't know if that's what it's called. Um, she says that's what killed your parents. So there's a lot more of a background in the show than there is in the book. Like we don't even get that much. I guess
No, at
I guess it's
all.
kind of a show of what the times are like, what the war is like, that there are orphans that you you don't know where they came from and you don't know why. Like I wonder if that's just kind of just getting us used to the war that's happening. I don't know what the intent is, but we really don't get anything about their past. I don't think in any of the books that
No.
I can remember.
So we get a little description. The boy is short and stocky. The girl, so in her head, she says, I knew I was different. Some foreshadowing there. Something that like really bothers me is the housekeeper and the cook in the story. It's like in the first page, talk about how ugly the little girl is. And
Yeah.
like she's ugly and skinny. Like that is so mean to say
Yeah.
about a child, plus an
Yep.
orphan child.
Yeah. It's so unnecessary. Like
It
why
is.
why?
Yeah. Like I don't know what pleasure it brings you to call out a little girl, but I guess fill your boots. Um, so the more unfortunate thing is that the little boy and the little girl are hiding in the cupboard in the kitchen, and they hear this. And the boy tells the little girl, "Oh, I don't think you're ugly." and that sort of made her feel good, and she sort of didn't really understand why. So they're already sort of laying the groundwork for at least one-sided feels.
Yeah.
It mentions that in the summertime, they had a really great time. They laughed and played outside and like could run in the fields and, just live their lives as children. But in the winter, it said that the adults were a lot more eager to just sit by the fire and sip on like alcohol. So the older kids in the orphanage would beat them up and pick on them. And this is what sort of made them bond. So they would start using like unused rooms in the unused portion of the mansion. They would start hiding there and using that as their play place to get away from the bullies. So it sort of cemented their bond of like it's them versus everybody else, right? It's just the two of them, and then there's everybody. Later, we get our first sort of note of the Grisha examiners. And this is sort of the one thing that bothered me about this book. And maybe it's because I'm used to the world building of Sarah J. from our last book. So last month when we did House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas, the first week, there was a ton of world building.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's almost the opposite. So they're throwing in words that I don't understand without explaining it.
Yeah.
So like they talk about Grishas and Grisha examiners. And then I think it's like a full 2 pages before they actually get into a little bit of what a Grisha even is.
Mm-hmm.
And like the same thing with the word kefta. Like they just flat out say the word, and sure, after a little bit you get the meaning of it, but I wish that there was a little bit more. I feel like I just wish it was fleshed out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Anyway, we eventually you figure out the terms. So these Grisha examiners come to the Duke's estate to discuss the little boy and the little girl. And there's 3 of them. They're all wearing a different color kefta, which I guess is like a coat, like a long coat.
Yeah, that's mostly from the show, I guess, that we...
Yeah. So one of them is red, one is blue, and one is purple. And color actually for the keftas is very important, as we'll see later on. But again, this is another thing that is mentioned, but we don't understand the significance of it until much later.
Mm-hmm.
So they talk a little bit about the Duke, who owns the estate. So apparently he was a war hero, and he opened his estate to orphans and widows from the war. They also say that they don't know how old the kids are, but they're assuming it's around the age of 8. So it's sort of another reason why I don't understand why there's no mention ever of their families, because I feel like 8 years old, you're old enough to remember your family if you had one.
Yeah. But I guess, we don't know what happened. Maybe it was traumatic for them and then they forgot everything, or like, I don't know.
I'm actually just now thinking of it. It also could be a deliberate choice to sort of insinuate that the kids' lives start there with each other instead of before.
Yeah.
But
interesting. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So as of now, we don't really know much about the kids. Just they're around 8. The housekeeper says that the girl has a talent for drawing, and the boy, he likes to be in the woods. And this actually stays with them through, this is something that continues into their adulthood. I don't know about you. I don't think what I'm into now, besides reading,
well, they would have just said, for both of us, they would have just said, she's a great reader. And that would have been the end of that. And they'd still be right now.
It's just, I don't think that what I was into at 8 years old, I'm really into now. like
Yeah.
Barbies.
I know, but I guess I was into swimming, and not that I'm super into swimming now, but I kind of still am.
You
In
like it, you just
reading.
don't get to. Yeah.
I did do a 5K swim across the ocean this summer, but
Woot woot.
but yeah, no, I think if you picked certain things, I'd probably be into the same ones.
Maybe.
But like
Anyway,
cutting my Barbie doll's hair, not still into that.
no.
So,
So the two kids are again, so they like to hide out and listen in on the housekeeper and the sort of the kitchen staff and whatever. So they're hiding out again and they're listening to this conversation because they don't get many visitors. So it's like really a big deal for there to be three Grisha in the living room. But so this time they're hiding out and they normally can remain unseen. But one of the Grisha, the one in purple, has this like sense and knows that they're there. So says like they're listening in on our conversation right now. So the housekeeper then yells at them, and we finally, after like 5 pages of them just being the girl and the boy, we learn their names.
oh wow, didn't realize we didn't get their names until now. That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So they've been the boy and the girl, but now they finally have names. The girl is Alina Starkov, and the boy is Malin Aretsev. Um, I do really like the take that the author has on this alternate universe. Like, I really like. So if you haven't noticed, or if you haven't, I find it is a little bit more obvious in the show that everything sort of takes on a Slavic.
Mm.
Like they use a lot of Slavic words.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a lot of the vocabulary stems from some form of Slavic dialect.
Yeah.
I don't speak any Slavic dialects, so I couldn't tell you how accurate they are, but they all sound that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the children sort of first call the Grisha witches. So we're sort of getting our first little hint of, okay, well, maybe this is more than just like a alternate reality sort of, or an alternate universe sort of book. There's actually a little bit of magic in there. But the Grisha are really offended at being called witches. And they sort of, it's sort of an awkward situation with the housekeeper at that point. They sort of like give her the stare down because it's like, where else would they have heard that term?
Yeah.
And they say, well, no, we're not witches, but we have mastered the small science that keeps the kingdom safe. Again, we don't really get we don't get an explanation of the small science, so we just have to sort of keep that in our back pocket and wait. The housekeeper mentions that there's also a first army that keeps everyone safe. So I think we could safely say that the housekeeper would rather that one.
Yeah.
So
I think she's a bit defensive of that army, is how it kind of feels.
yeah, so the first army is sort of the army that's made up of regular soldiers, right? So they're regular people. The second army is the one that's made up of the Grisha. So if you're a regular person, obviously you're going to appreciate the first army because they're going into it with no magic, we'll say. They're just
Mm-hmm.
using their own blood,
Wits and
sweat,
guns.
and yeah. Anyway, they do go on to explain that not everybody has the ability to be a Grisha. So it's born. You are born Grisha. You are not made. And that's why the Grisha examiners are there, to test the kids to see if one of them are Grisha.
Mm-hmm.
And they sort of say, if by some miracle one of you is Grisha, then you'll have the finest education, you'll have the finest clothes and food, and you will directly serve the king.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of one of those things where, like, why on earth would you say that? Like,
I feel like you have this conversation every book. You're like, why are you trying to piss people off and get results? Like, just be
yeah.
nice and they'll appreciate it. You have
Yeah,
this
it's true.
literally you could do a TED talk from every single one of these books. Just be nice.
Yeah, you're
It-
right.
no,
You're
but
right. I
it
do.
makes sense.
But no, but I do think that uh it's a silly thing for them to do. So they literally have found them sneaking out together, like, and listening in together. The sort of they've heard that they're both orphans. They look like they're like friends, and then they're saying, "Oh, well, maybe one of you will get to be us, and then you'll get to come with us." And it's like, you are deliberately threatening to keep them apart. Like,
Yeah.
it's never a good thing. You just
No.
don't say it. Like, there are some things you could do to keep it in reserve. Anyway, so because they make it abundantly clear that it is a rare occurrence, and the chances are that if maybe one of them will be, but if there is one of them, then they'll be separated. So the kids sort of look at each other like they're about to like face war. So like they know
Yeah.
that it's us against everybody, and they hold hands, and that's sort of all we get. Is like that's sort of our last look at our before, is the two of them holding hands, like, and sort of looking at each other like they're ready to take on the world, and that's it.
Yeah. I don't really understand if so when you watch the show, there are flashbacks during the show to their past. And in one of them, you see this moment where the tests are there, and then basically they're like, if you're injured, you can't be tested. And I don't think that's actually true in the book, or we don't hear that in the book at all.
No, you're right. That is the way that they do testing is a little bit different, I think. Like they throw that in as our little plot device in the show.
Hmm.
That's not accurate.
Yeah. So in the book, like, obviously they do get tested because they're right there. They're walking in to be tested. And I kind of like the books way better because in the book, like, not to jump too far ahead into the chapters we're going to talk about today, but in the book, she just pushes down and overcomes it. And that's kind of why she's sickly and probably ugly, is because she's denying who she is. But in the show, they're like, oh, she just cut her hand and she didn't test right because of that. Um, but I like the books way better. I get that they're going to change things for the show because nuances don't work as well. And also, there isn't obviously a whole lot. Like, we don't really get anything else about the testing other than every now and then, like, maybe she'll say something about it, but
Yeah.
there's nothing really profound about the testing past now.
See, I sort of am the opposite in that I sort of like the show's way
Hmm.
better of testing than the book. So in the book, when they do the test to see if you're Grisha, essentially they just call up their power and try and make yours respond, right?
Yeah.
So in the book, she sort of pushes that down, not to get too far into the spoilers,
Yeah.
but she pushes it down, not sort of not fully consciously aware of what it is.
Literally in response to what they just said to her. That if one of you
Yeah,
showed, yeah,
yeah.
like,
But I don't think she's, as an 8-year-old, fully aware in the book that what she's
no.
pushing down is Grisha power. Like,
N-
she is fully, uh, when she's an adult, she fully believes she's not.
No, exactly. But she, at that moment, as an 8-year-old, is like, if one of us is different, they're going to take us. So
Yeah.
I think that she's actively trying to, she
Yes.
probably feels something and is like, I could just be imagining it like we all
Yeah.
do when we think we have COVID. like pushing it down. But yeah, no, I think
But
you're right.
but in the show, I like that it was sort of intentional. So she
Hmm.
intentionally secretly injured herself so that
Hmm.
the test wouldn't work. Like she knew
Yeah,
all along she was different, and she knew that if she tested, she would show up as
yeah,
something. So she intentionally hurt herself. It just felt more purposeful to me.
yeah. I get what
Like
you're saying.
she was more aware of her decision.
Yeah. And I do like that more, especially kind of when you get into chapter 3, especially. Like, she is very adamantly oblivious. And I'm like, you would realize by now.
Yeah,
Like, you would
for sure.
notice by now. Like, I know that you don't feel like it, but you would notice by now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I do appreciate that when she's older. I wish that in the book she realized earlier. I'm like, you're not cute anymore. Stop pretending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a nice that was a little bit of a digression.
Yes, but
Uh
it's needed
it,
because it is.
it's needed because it just is.
Exactly.
So we jump forward to the present day, and we have an army regiment marching toward the Shadowfold. And again, another word that they shove in that they don't explain in another like page, but whatever. Um, so a soldier bumps into another one, and the smaller one essentially calls him out. And then the smaller soldier says that people aren't used to someone small in stature to be super lippy. And I love that because it's actually, I do think small people would be lippy.
Yeah,
Like, I would think the
100%.
opposite.
Yeah, everybody I know
Usually,
that's short is super lippy.
yes. Geez, when I have students, the smaller they are, the more like they need to calm down because
Yeah.
they get into it. Uh, but again, we actually don't know who the soldier is at this point.
Mm,
I wonder.
yeah.
Uh, we're told that we are in the land of Ravka, so that's the name of our country,
Hmm.
and the Shadowfold severed Ravka from its coastline, which makes it landlocked. So it essentially um, cut the country into two pieces, a part that's next to the ocean and then a part that's not.
Hmm.
Um, then we get our sort of definition of the Shadowfold. So apparently it's depicted on maps as sort of a stain, like a black stain or a black cloud.
Hmm.
Sometimes it sort of looks like a lake. Uh, they label it the unsea to put people at ease for if they have to cross. Apparently, it's like just a big, like swath of darkness that holds horrors inside.
I don't see
Uh,
how naming it the on sea changes that, but
hey man, whatever puts you at ease.
fair.
Uh, they also say that it's been steadily growing every year. Um, but it also sort of just appeared one day and it's
Mm.
been growing every year. Um, so we finally then learned that the little soldier who's super lippy is Alina Starkov. Surprise. And she's walking with Malian, who is known as Mal. Like, I don't think they ever call him Malian in the book. In the book
No,
again, he's
ever.
just Mal. So they're all walking towards the military encampment that's close to the fold. Her and Mal are like teasing each other. Apparently, he's turned into a super flirt and he's like flirting with other girls on the walk. It's very common for there to be other females in the regiment. Like, it's an equal playing field,
Hmm.
guys and girls.
I think
Um,
they just recruit everybody.
yeah.
He
And
also
Aline,
seems like a fuck boy.
he
Mal is a
does.
fuck boy in the
Yeah.
books.
No, he really does. He comments that he's like really good looking and all the girls notice him all of a sudden. Um, she also mentions that like other girls have pretended to be her friend and get close to her just to become closer to him because he's so
Yeah.
hot. I really dislike that. I think that's a really terrible thing to do if you're a girl. I feel like that's not the way to get noticed.
Yep.
If
Agree.
that's your aim, like you don't use another girl. Like,
Yeah.
come on, stick together.
Exactly.
Um, they sort of talk about how happy Mal is that even though he's going into the Shadowfold, so like he's acting super happy even though he has to go into the Shadowfold, which is super dangerous, and he could die. And he sort of is like, well, like I got my rifle, I'll be fine. And they're like, well, guns and rifles aren't really useful. Um, Another little bit of terminology that they drop in here is Mal then says, oh, they've got a bunch of Grisha pyros sent to cover the skiff. So like I know what the word skiff is just because of where we live.
Yeah.
Boats are prevalent, so I know what a skiff is. But again, like the whole Grisha pyros thing is
I
still
know what a
not.
pyro is.
Yeah, but Grisha, like the term still hasn't. It's not
No.
super familiar yet.
I'm assuming it has something to do with fire, but I actually have no idea what it means.
Yeah.
Not in a good tense. I'm like, that's not a good thing. I don't want pyros around.
No, and why would you
Around a
want them?
skiff.
Yeah, you wouldn't want them on your boat,
No.
especially if your boat is made of wood.
Exactly.
They sort of drop in that Alina hasn't been sleeping well, but apparently she never sleeps well. But apparently the past few days has been worse because she has this feeling of dread that she doesn't really understand. And then we discuss that her whole regimen has been chosen to make the crossing of the Shadowfold. So they're all making the crossing of the Shadowfold. This is very different than the show. In the show, her regiment was not chosen to make the crossing itself, but Mal was chosen through a lottery to make the crossing, and Alina was never supposed to go, but she ended up, and we'll mention this a little bit more when it gets to that moment. But she ended up ensuring that she would also go because she didn't want him to go without her.
Yeah.
So it felt a little more desperate in the show.
Which
In the
I
books,
understand why they did it for like drama and keep people
yes.
watching and like
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
They mention the term Volcra. So a Volcra is a monster in the fold. So it's generally the issue in the Shadowfold. It's what they come across that is so dangerous. It's a monster with bat wings, claws, and very sharp teeth. So it tends to kill a lot of people, which is why nobody wants to go in there.
Makes sense. I'd stay away too.
Alina is like super worried about crossing the fold, but Mal is not at all. He's like, yeah, it'll be fine. Like people make the crossing all the time, whatever.
Yeah.
As they're walking down the road, they have to like rush to the side because a horse and carriage like comes barreling through and like almost runs them all over. And they say, oh, that was the Darkling's carriage. And the Darkling is apparently somebody very important. But again, we don't know who it is yet. There's an awkward moment when Mal sort of realizes that they jump to the side. He put his arms around her and I guess doesn't let go. And so they have this awkward moment where he sort of like notices, like, oh shit, I haven't let go yet. So then he lets go. And like it makes it obvious that you can tell Alina has feelings for him because she keeps bringing up how handsome he is and how much of a ladies' man he is and how she doesn't like that. And, oh, he's got his arms around me. Um, but this almost makes it seem reciprocal a little bit. Like this moment, the fact that he kept his arms around her and then only let go when she sort of like noticed.
Yeah.
You know
And
what I
was kind of
mean?
awkward about letting go. Like, that's
Yeah.
the part that makes you be like, yeah.
Yeah.
And like, obviously, Alina doesn't notice it, but as
No.
a reader, you can kind of be like, oh, what does that mean? And that's one of the hardest parts of the book is that it is in Alina's point of view.
Yes. So this is a first person only narrative. So we really are only in Alina's head.
Hmm.
Um, a couple other carriages go by, a red one and a blue one. Out of the blue one, a Grisha sticks her head out the window and like locks eyes with Mal and makes sex eyes at him. That's what I thought. And like Alina's sort
Yeah.
of just standing there, like, well,
This is
fine.
awkward.
Yeah. um, we meet Mal's two friends next. They're trackers in his unit along with him, Mikhail and Dubrov. So they sort of say, oh, Grisha girls can put spells on you. And then they tease Alina a little bit. They're just like acting like bros, like they do.
Rose.
They are bros.
Yeah. But we get a bit more about, I guess, Grisha from them too, and a bit like of, I guess, things people say because Grisha are different.
Yeah. So, yeah, like we learn that obviously, yes, the Grisha are very well taken care of. They are given fine clothes, a really good education, and, they serve the king. But amongst the common people, they are not thought of well.
Mm. Which like
Um,
is pretty shitty because like you're born a Grisha. It's not like you can choose it. So like even if you were just a regular person, then if they decided, oh hey, no, you're a Grisha, not decided, but if they figured it out, like now you're in this group that people hate basically or
yeah,
fear for yeah, it's could be shitty.
yeah. Um, so the three guys walk off and they're like shooting the shit about hooking up with the hottie Grisha that was in the blue carriage. And they essentially leave Alina behind. Like she's just walking down the road and they leave her alone.
Mm,
Like, how rude is that? Mal is supposed to be, I guess, technically her oldest friend,
yeah.
her family, if they're
Hmm.
still in the same regiment and like still talking to each other after God knows how many years.
Yeah.
And then he just like walks off without her. Come on, dude.
They're also teenage boys, so ugh.
Um, so she finally shows up in the town where the military is stationed, and the town is called Kribirsk, and she has to go to her surveyor tent. So this is when we learn her job. She is a junior cartographer's assistant. So every single day, she has to submit 2 drawings or renderings. So I guess in addition to this world being sort of Slavic in nature, it's also, I don't want to say primitive, but there's no technology really.
Yes.
So, like, she's a junior map maker. So they have to resort to pencils for maps. Like,
Hmm.
which is why, so her proficiency for art is helping her here. She's a great drawer, so therefore she can make good maps.
Yeah, it's just not modern technology.
Yes. I don't know how they are with, do they have electricity?
I think they do in the little palace, but I could be wrong. I don't remember hearing either way.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So when she goes in to do her drawings, her colleague Alexei wants to know everything about the Darkling coach that Alina saw. I guess he saw that it went right by her, so he's trying to get the deets. He even like gives her one of his drawings so that she only has to do one, which was nice.
Yeah.
After that, they go for supper and they sit with all the surveyors. It's a very cliquey it's a very cliquey area. So all the surveyors sit with each other, the trackers sit with each other, the first army sits with each other. The Grisha, I don't even think eat in that tent. They have their own tent to eat in.
Probably not.
So essentially, they sort of start talking about the Grisha and how they don't think the Darkling, who was the one in the coach, is natural. And then we hear someone else say, oh, it was another Darkling hundreds of years ago that created the Shadowfold. So that's another little bit of information that we get. The Shadowfold was actually created by a Darkling hundreds of years ago. And now we have another Darkling, and I guess people don't really like him.
We don't really know because all we have is like
Alina.
a few frat boys telling us. So
yeah,
we don't really know what that means because like
I will say that like their military strategy sucks. So by the Grisha get their own tent that's apparently huge and like luxurious. The Darkling gets his own tent with guards and corporalky heartrenders. Again, words we don't really know now.
Yeah.
But it just seems to me like if you wanted to create a sense of family and a sense of like cohesion in your community in your armies, why would you keep them so separate? Like, if you know they're going to be stationed together, instead of two separate tents, make one big one.
Yeah.
Or like, you know what I mean? It seems
counterintuitive.
Yes. Good word. Thank you. So I guess Alina goes to bed later and she wakes up to tapping on the wall, and she knows immediately that it's Mal, so she goes outside to meet him. I would not wake up to tapping on the wall at all. I don't understand how she does. I guess she's a terrible sleeper, but I would not wake up to that.
I'd wake up to that. I wake up to everything.
Yeah. I'm the opposite. I'm out like a light and I will sleep until my alarm wakes me up. They sort of talk about what they are doing to cross the fold, like why they're crossing the fold. They sort of say Mal has to hunt and track animals that can only be found on the other side. And Alina needs to finish her cartographer training on the other side. So they're going, and it sounds like they're going to be there for a little while anyway, on the other side. And they're really excited about going and like seeing the ocean and stuff.
Yeah.
She sort of admits that she likes Mal romantically.
Likes.
Yeah, like she likes him. But she doesn't think that he likes her back. Like she thinks that he just sees her as his friend. They joined the military service together 1 year ago, so they haven't been in it that long. And he noticed and says to her that she looked miserable at dinner. That's such a nice compliment from the guy that you have a crush on.
Thanks, bro.
Right? But I will say that him noticing that she looked miserable makes her wonder if maybe he has a thing for her too. Because she's like, why? Yeah, like why else would he notice?
Maybe he's more in tune to her feelings than she thought.
Yeah. So they sort of confide in each other that they are both nervous about the crossing, but Mal sort of says, don't worry, it'll be safe. And tomorrow after the crossing, we'll both be on the other side having a drink together. Uh, and he sort of is very clear to say, like, just the two of us, and says, like, it's always been just the two of us.
Mm.
So he is more attached to her than she believes.
Yeah, especially than we've seen proof of to this point.
Yes. But I guess Alina does say in her head that he's never looked at her the way he's looked at other girls. And she sort of feels like they're growing apart. Like he's gotten stronger and braver. And she sort of feels like she's stayed the same. Like she hasn't really grown or gotten any different.
Yeah.
And it sort of makes her feel a bit like iffy, like uncertain, I guess we'll say.
Yeah, for sure. Insecure.
Yeah, insecure. So the next morning they make their way to the sand skiffs, which are like shallow sleds. I feel like they're just like really shallow boats.
Mm.
Like in my head, I think of like the Viking boats
Mm-hmm.
from How to Train Your Dragon.
Yeah, same.
Right?
Yeah,
With the
exactly the
sails on
same.
them. That is
Yep.
what I think of. So they have huge sails in them, and that's what helps them get across the unsea. So, but instead of sailing across water, they sail across sand.
I don't understand the logistics of it.
I mean, I guess,
How?
I guess sand is you could go through it like that. Like
I
it's
guess.
not. I feel like it's not that much different than like say snow. And snow, you can have a sled go through
With a
it.
motor, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but
and I guess
they have magic.
they do, yeah. But yeah, I'm like, this part I'm just going to let my brain gloss over because it doesn't make sense. So I'm just going to let it be. I'm going to
Yeah.
put that off as I don't understand and move along.
Yeah. I will say so. Like again, we sort of talked about it already. That in the book, they are all going. All the trackers are going together to track the animals. In the show, he's picked from a lottery of trackers. He's going as the only one. So that's sort of our difference there between book and show. Alina is not happy about him going, and she's like, well, I need to go with him. I will say it's not a great choice. Like it ends up being a good choice, yes, but like
Well, does it?
I mean, for him, I guess.
For them, yes.
But like in the grand scheme, her as a regular person, that's what she thinks of herself. She's a map maker. What is she gonna do to keep him safe?
Yeah.
Like, what is she thinking of? Oh, I've got to get on that boat so I can go with him. Like, why? What are you gonna do to help him?
Well, like, if he's going to die, at least I'll die too, and then I won't be sad. That's literally,
fair point.
That's what I think it is.
Yeah. Anyway, so in the show, what Alina does to ensure that she also goes on the boat is she finds a map of the other side of Ravka that they need, and she burns it. So again, we said before that this world has no modern technology. So she burned the map. That is the only copy of the map that they have. They can't like make copies willy-nilly or like save it on a PDF or something like that. So there were no other copies of the map, and then she volunteered to go and redraw the map. So she then, after she burns the map, volunteers to go so that she can redraw the map. And I think initially she thinks that if she volunteers, then she'll be the only one that has to go. They don't need cartographers on the other side right now. So, if they just have the one, it's fine. And then, no, the, I guess, captain makes all the cartographers go. Makes all the cartographers go. So, yeah, she sort of put her foot in it a little bit because
Yeah.
before it was just going to be her life on the line, but now it's everybody's.
Hmm.
So we figure out that they're making the crossing in the book. They're making the crossing to make trades with the other side of Ravka. So from their side, they're bringing timber and grains and cotton, sort of like unfinished natural resources. And then they're going to return. They're going to go to the other side of Ravka um, and trade for finished goods, sugar, and rifles. Uh, all important things.
Yep.
Um, the skiff holds a whole bunch of armed soldiers, along with some Grisha, two etherealki, which is like the word in this book for summoners, and they're wearing dark blue keftas with sort of silver thread at the cuffs, and that indicates that they are squallers. So they can raise or lower air pressure and make the sails of the boat fill with air and sail them across the sand. Fancy way of saying that they can use air magic.
Hmm. Yep.
So I guess this is sort of the thing. So the Grisha are like split into a bunch of different categories. So they are etherealki, so that means they wear the blue kefta, but there are a bunch of subsets of etherealki who could control different things. These ones just happen to control air, so they're called squallers.
Hmm.
There were also a couple of etherealki there with the blue kefta with red cuffs. And because they had red cuffs, that meant that they could summon fire. So they are the pyros that were mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
And then, of course, there was a whole bunch of armored guards, including Mal with a rifle and a bunch of bowmen. So, like, people with bows and arrows. Um, so the ship is loaded with weapons, I guess we'll say, but in weapons in people.
Hmm.
And in the book, for some unknown reason, Volcra start attacking the boat 5 to 10 minutes into their journey. Like, it's not very many minutes, like, they're not on the way very long.
Yeah.
And hundreds of Volcra start descending on them. In the show, it's a lot more deliberate. Like,
Hmm.
they're being nice and quiet. They're told to be quiet. They're moving along, and one dude, like, lights a candle.
Yeah.
And that sort of alerts the Volcra as the light. That's what alerts them to the presence.
Yeah.
So that's another little subtle difference between the book and the show. Is the show sort of gives it a little bit more purpose.
Yeah.
It makes like the Volcra have a reason for things. Like, we see this
Yeah.
light, we are drawn to it, like moths to a
Which
flame.
makes more sense. I don't know why they were being very quiet. They were just going through.
And
Maybe
then,
they're scouting now. I don't know. I don't
yeah,
know what Volker do, but
yeah. So in the book, the Volcra are attacking them. There's like hundreds of them, so they're obviously outnumbered. They're like swooping and diving and grabbing at passengers and like lifting them off into the unknown. One of them grabbed Alexei, who was Alina's cartographer friend that gave her the drawing and like wanted all the gossip, and carried him off. So that made her sad. Um,
but it
it
didn't in the show, and that's the
no,
worst part. Because in the show, it's her fucking fault
that's
that
true.
he's there in the first place,
Yeah.
and that part pisses me off. But
Another Volcra comes for Alina and like tries to carry her off, but Mal comes to her defense and shoots it. So the Volcra starts attacking Mal instead and like claws his chest and injures him. So Alina grabs at its wing, just like holds it by the wing and uses her knife to like stab at it. And then Mal sort of shot at it again and killed it. But you know, when you have something claw at your chest like that, you get really injured.
Mhm. In a ripped shirt kind of way, and like
Yeah,
in like a hot kind
exactly.
of way.
Yeah, exactly. But he was essentially dying at this point.
Less
Um,
hot.
yeah. And more Volcra like start coming and like swarming to attack them. So Alina sort of like covers her body with Mal's and is sort of like, well, he's dying. I'm about to die. Like she goes for it.
Mm.
A Volcra sort of grabs at Alina and sinks its talon into her shoulder and like starts to carry her into the sky. And according to the book now, this is what the book says. A sudden pierce of light moved across her eyes, and she felt the Volcra let go, and she fell back on the deck of the skiff and hit her head and got knocked out. So that's all we sort of know is a pierce of light moved across her eyes, and the Volcra let her go. I do sort of like the show, the way the show did it,
Mm.
because it's a similar thing. Like, yes, Mal is like dying and she's trying to protect him,
Hmm.
but the Volcra then goes to lift her up, and Mal is like dying, but also like struggling, like to not let her go. And
Yeah.
she also doesn't want to let him go.
Hmm.
And that sort of our catalyst moment is it's again,
Yes.
it's the two of them together not wanting to be separated.
Yeah.
And then she gets knocked out, of course,
Yeah.
because that's what happens after traumatic events, because females are so,
Delicate.
yes.
So Alina wakes up because this is from her point of view. So there's nothing between being knocked out and waking up. So she wakes up and she's being guarded and she doesn't really understand why. So she's like kind of trying to figure out what's going on, but everyone seems kind of weary around her and a bit afraid of her. And the only thing she really cares about is Mal. She's wondering where the hell he is and if he is okay. And nobody wants to tell her anything. And she's just very confused. So she's also wondering where they are because the last thing she knew, they were in the middle of the fold. And now they're basically back in Ravka on the same side that they started from, and they have gotten nowhere. So basically, the captain of the skiff, I guess, is taking her back to the officer's tent, and there's a corporalnik near her who's also guarding her. And this Grisha tries to tell the captain that it's a waste of time to kind of go to the officer's tent. Like, we should go talk to the Darkling, like, go to the Grisha. And the captain is very dismissive and kind of treats the Grisha as less than human, even though they're like obviously super powerful. They can do small science slash magic. Like, it just seems very rude. Um, the colonel pretty rudely asks Alina what she is, and she's very confused. And kind of like I said earlier, she is a bit willfully ignorant in this part. Like, I understand thinking that you're a normal person, wishing you're a normal person. Like, you actively have pushed something down in your youth to make yourself a normal person. Yes, you're going to push back against all of this, but the book is in your head. So, like, we know different. Like, we should hear a bit more about how you're maybe not so normal. But eventually they basically go to the Darkling's tent. And it's apparently beautiful inside. and we get our first glimpse of the Darkling as well, and he's very beautiful too. And he's the only Grisha that's allowed to wear black. And he looks about the same age as Alina, so he looks very young. We don't know his actual age, but he looks very young.
Can I just say that, like, one of the draws that the show had for me was the fact that the actor who plays the Darkling is Ben Barnes. I heart him so much. He was Prince Caspian um, in Chronicles of Narnia.
Hmm.
Uh, Obviously, the Prince Caspian, like the second film and the third film,
Yeah.
and I heart him. He is so cute.
Yeah, I'm in love with him. And like I don't think it clouds my judgment for the Darkling because when I first read the book, I was also in love with the Darkling. Like
Yeah,
just love a bad guy.
yeah.
That's just who I am. But like it kind of made it worse for me cuz you watch the show and you're like, "Yep, he's the one."
I heart Ben
OTP.
Barnes.
Basically.
Yeah,
Like Darkly and Alina, go get married. This is why do we even have another season? I don't know.
yeah.
But
I agree. And like, I'm not usually on the bad boy train. I don't think like,
no,
but
not
I
like me.
not like you, but I am totally here for the Darkling, and both separately and together. Like, I
Hmm.
like Ben Barnes acting as the Darkling, but I also like the character of the Darkling. So, like,
Yeah,
separately, I still like both of them.
agreed. So Alina's in the tent now, and the beautiful Grisha that found Mal hot is in the tent. And in the show, she played a more pivotal role before now. She was in a tent when he stole some, I think it was grapes, and they had a conversation and she wanted to sleep with him. And I think in the book, when he talks to Alina, he kind of implies that either he possibly could have slept with her. I don't think we really know if he did or not, but like Alina,
She makes that assumption
yeah, she
because
makes the assumption that they
yeah,
did.
I think it has to do with the fact that like the Grisha is like really beautiful and like made the sex eyes at Mal, and he sort of like grinned back
Hmm.
at her, and apparently it's like, I don't know if I would say a rite of passage, but like it's a ooh moment if you get to be with a Grisha girl.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
she's just assuming that it happened.
yes. So this same Grisha is in the tent, and she seems like another classic mean girl. She's kind of laughing at Alina's appearance, like showing up. She's obviously not in the best state of mind or dress or anything
Well,
after being through some trauma,
yeah,
realistically.
and like injury, like she
Yeah.
was picked up and clawed at by a bat-like creature. She's like bleeding from her shoulder and her back,
Yeah.
and it's
And
like
then nothing to the head injury she just got. Like,
yeah, that too.
yeah.
And it's like, oh, she should have been dressed better. Like, can you believe how dirty she is? It's like,
Basically.
yes, bitch. Like, leave her alone.
Exactly. So I guess the Darkling has organized this, or people have brought them here, but the senior cartographer and another of the survivors from the skiff are brought in as witnesses. And Alina also finally sees that Mal is alive. And she's obviously very relieved to see this. Um, the soldier that's there kind of recounts what he saw happen on the skiff. He kind of goes over the attack that we all know about, and then there was a bright light that looked like you were looking into the sun, and then the captain ordered the vessel to turn back. And then the cartographer kind of basically tells the same story, but he adds that he saw a Volcra go after Alina and Mal, and he saw them go down, and then Alina lit up, and he says that the light came from her. And Alina just thinks that everyone's crazy at this point, and you can tell that there are many Grisha there, including Mean Girl, that think that this is ridiculous and there's no way that it's possible. And like, what is she? A sun summoner? That doesn't even exist. So, like, not possible.
Yeah, they say that like a sun summoner is like a fairy tale,
Uh-huh.
right? There's no such thing as a sun summoner. They're not real. But like
Yeah.
obviously when you're like, "Oh, well that's not real." Obviously that's what we have.
Yeah. So the Darkling now is like a bit scary and well in Alina's mind. And she's like, there are rumors about him that she kind of thought were foolish, but now she's not really sure because she's obviously never been in his presence before. And the Darkling asks Mal what he saw. And he says that he saw the Valkyra attack, and then Alina screamed, and the world was shiny. He doesn't, Mal doesn't believe that Alina could have summoned the light because he knows her. And he knows that she's just a normal human, and there's no way that she could summon light. She did the testing like everybody else, like she's not a Grisha, so there's no way it could be her.
I found Mal very like almost like you could tell he was covering for her,
Mm, yeah.
right? So like he was telling the story and telling how like yeah, the world was shiny, but like no, it definitely couldn't have been her. But like he deep down he knows exactly
Oh,
that.
he definitely saw it. Like based on the like he didn't hit his head and then forget everything.
Yeah.
Not forget everything, but he didn't hit his head and then black out. Like he saw that it was her, and he probably in his now maybe 18-year-old brain thought back to when they were 8 and they said, we're gonna take you, and
Yeah.
if you're special. And he was like, no, she's not special. Not that she's not special. No, she's not different. They're not going to separate us.
Yeah.
Like he just didn't want to be separated, I think, as well. But
Yeah.
in her, it's such a hard book because it's obviously her point of view. And I didn't really question it until I saw the show, because we do get moments from Mal's point of view that make you realize that like show Mal seems a lot better than book Mal, because show Mal you can see how much he cares about her, and book Mal it's from her point of view, so you don't know how much he could or could not care about her. But anyway, so the Darkling goes to Alina and asks her what the hell is going on, and she says that she can't really remember it. She can't figure out where the light came from. She saw it too, like everybody else, but she doesn't know where it came from. So the Darkling asks her to hold out her arm, and she's like kind of confused, doesn't really want to do it, but obviously doesn't have a choice. Um, and his palms curl with something black, and he says, now let's see what you can do. And he brings them together with a very dramatic clap. And yeah, I kind of miss that in the show. Like in the
Yeah.
show, in the show, he never claps, but in the book, they often talk about him clapping his magic. And I'm like, that is the dramatic shit that I live for.
Yeah.
But
Agreed.
in the show, he's like, he just like scratches her arm basically, and it shoots out of her cut, which I didn't love that.
Was
But
that was that in the book too?
in the book, it's a bit in my mind. In the book, in my mind. Let me tell you what that means. In the
Yeah, no,
book,
I
through my through my reading, um, the Darkling kind of like, so he puts his arm around Alina's wrist
and then
and
calls
her
it out, right?
calls the magic, and then she pushes it back down because she's like, oh, I've done this before, I don't like that. And she pushes it down because that's how she's done it since she was a child.
Right.
and it's not she's not letting it come up, and then he can sense that she's not letting it come up, so he cuts her arm, and she like can't hold it back any longer, and light explodes from her. But
Hmm.
I didn't think it exploded from her cut. I thought that it just like came from her. And I don't think the cut was really what made it explode. It just kind of took her defenses down because she was more scared. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it was a bit different than the show. Like it's just like minor differences, but I enjoyed the book better. But
Yeah,
comme ci, comme
100%.
ça. So she, of course, because she's a dainty female, collapses
Mhm.
again. And the Darkling
Right.
catches her, and he says, "I guess you only look like a mouse." And that's an interesting thing to say to someone when they just collapsed. But
And you and this is your very first time meeting them?
yeah, but this is also the moment that I was like, who is this guy? Like, I think I could get behind this guy as a love interest. Like, yeah, I stan a guy that knows that this woman is powerful and can't be fucked with. Like, that's I think that was my first moment of like, yes,
But
Darkling.
can I be honest though and say that like I almost prefer show Alina in not in power, but sort of in like in how she deals with it.
Hmm.
How she deals with everything. Like I find Book Alina is very um so like starts off very like no, this isn't me, like you've got some mistake and blah blah blah.
Hmm.
And then just sort of accepts everything very quickly and is content to let other people think for her and do everything for her. She's just a very passive um,
Yeah, protagonist.
protagonist.
Yeah.
And I find show Alina sort of a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more like, no, I'm going to take control of my own destiny and I'm going to deal with it.
Yeah. I think I think a bit of it does have to do with the point of view shift. Um, like we're in her head, and I think that is a negative, especially in the beginning of this part after she hit her head, because it shows how willing she is to be ignorant. And I think that does a disservice to her as a character. Whereas in the show, she can seem stronger because we don't know what's actually happening in her head.
Yeah.
Um, but obviously, that's how the book is written. So, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
So, the Darkling hands her off to get basically shipped to the little palace with an armed guard. Ivan is a heart renderer, and he takes her away. And he's like a bit rough with her. And the Darkling um, kind of gets mad at him and tells him to be careful because Alina is the Grisha now. She doesn't have a chance to say goodbye to Mal, and as she's leaving, she sees him and sees the confusion and panic in his eyes, and that obviously is like the last moment she has with him. Alina gets put in the Darkling's black coach, uh, basically against her will. She's trying to be like, I'm just a normal girl, leave me alone. And they're like, stop being dumb. Um, there are people that are going to come and try to kill you now because they've probably heard about this. And they specifically say Fjordan spies and Shuhan assassins. So that's all we hear about them. There are very few words about things until we get into it later.
But we will say, they are, so Fjerda is another country, and same with
Hmm.
Shuhan.
Yeah,
It's another country bordering with Ravka. So essentially saying that the other countries are going to come and hunt her down.
yeah.
We also don't really get an explanation, but Alina is I guess a sun summoner, but like There are no more.
Yeah.
She's it.
Yeah.
So just putting
Yeah.
that out there.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, like it's a myth,
Mm,
but it's really not something that they get into the myth of in the book
right.
until I don't even know if it's until like maybe the second book or something
Yeah.
when
I think it's book 2.
yeah. So a woman healer gets into the carriage with her and is asked to basically take care of Alina's wounds. And Alina's never been healed before, and she's really scared because obviously it's not. So she doesn't know if it's painful. She doesn't know what's going to happen. And anyway, it's just kind of tickles. It's a bit itchy, and she's fine. And then Ivan um, basically tells the healer to give Alina her kefta and kicks the healer out. So we get a bit more about the kefta now, and it's a special fabric that can withstand bullets. And Alina kind of thinks about how it isn't fair that Grisha get this, but regular soldiers fighting in the First Army are defenseless. And in the show, she actually like comments on it, but in the book, she kind of just thinks it in her head. Um, but it is a good point, obviously. Like this fabric can withstand bullets. Why isn't it being shared around?
And it's a reoccurring theme in the book too about like the
Hmm.
haves versus the have-nots.
Exactly. Yeah. So we also get, I guess the Darkling symbol is on the carriage, and it's two overlapping circles, which is the sun in eclipse. So it's just a point out of what his symbol is. Um, and they are on their way, and everyone in the carriage with her is staring at her, and she's kind of getting a bit pissed off, and she's like, what are they expecting me to do? Just burst into flames? Like it's getting to be too much for her. So Fedyor introduces himself, and he's a heart renderer. And he explains that the fold does their enemies' work. It isolates and kills them. And she could get rid of the fold if she could summon light enough to basically remove it. So that's kind of why all of the Grisha and all of the commoners even are praying for a sun summoner, is because the sun summoner may have the ability to get rid of the fold's darkness. They kind of ask her how she hid her abilities and ask if she was tested. And she was, but she was older than most because she got tested when she was 8. So we don't really hear much about how she fooled them, but I guess being older was probably easier than if she was younger.
She also doesn't really get into it either, does she? Like,
No, I don't think she ever does.
she never says, like, I just pushed it down. Like, she just says, I
Yeah,
don't know. She sort of keeps clinging to this, um, this
I'm normal.
imaginary,
Yeah,
yeah, this untruth, will say that she's normal.
yeah, exactly. So the Darkling is what's called a human amplifier. There's different kinds of amplifiers, but they basically bring out the magic. They make it easier to do magic. So if a Grisha as a child is near an amplifier, they'll show their powers basically kind of, I guess, against their will ish. Like it's just easier to show
Yeah.
it. So that's why they get tested really young, and then normally it shows. So Fedyor also says that you could have different amplifiers, and he has a bear claw, and he had to kill it basically himself, and now it amplifies his powers. And only the Darkling's favorites are allowed to have amplifiers. So Alina feels very sure and confident basically when the Darkling forced her power out of her. And it seems like she isn't used to this feeling. She isn't used to feeling confident in herself. And it kind of makes you think that she has been suppressing this for so long because she's afraid to be different, that like letting it come out is who she truly is. And it's something that she's been missing in her life up until now, basically.
Right.
So they're on their way. It is a very long journey, it seems, because like a few days and nights pass. She sleeps sporadically. There's a bit of an interesting tidbit when Alina asks why Fedyor decided to be a heartrender instead of a healer. And it's a nice moment for us as readers because it seems you can choose your speciality based on, I guess, I'm assuming the main type of Grisha you are is already set, and then you might be able to choose between those. I don't know if we even get into more of this in any of the books, but I think this is the first time that it's mentioned. And he feels that he can do more good as a heart renderer. And it's interesting because a heart renderer is somebody that can basically slow down your heart or speed up your heart. Basically, I guess, could make your heart race until you have a heart attack and die, or slow it down until you fall asleep and die. Like it's really a sign of the world that they live in and the time that they're living in, which is war, that you would think that you could do better as a heart renderer.
Yeah.
So the carriage stops, and someone comes back and says that there's a tree across the road, but it could be a trap. And it ends up that it is, which is like a huge parallel with Six of Crows, if you've read it. And it's kind of a little Easter egg there. But the Fjordans are here. And she is told to stay inside the carriage, and they leave her with a large knife. Almost immediately, like, she's hauled from the carriage. It's really not a great plan. They didn't do a very good job of saving her. So she's hauled from the carriage, but she does fight back. She's in the First Army. She knows how to fight. She fights back with this knife, and then she runs. And a Fjordan catches her and tells her he's going to kill her and calls her a witch. And there's a moment where now you can hear horses coming, and it's a bunch of Grisha led by the Darkling. And he does his dramatic clap again, which is sorely missing from the show. But every time I read it in the book, I just think it's so extra and I love it. And the soldiers, um, I guess he blinds them all with darkness, and it gives the Grisha an advantage. And Alina a second to kind of like yell out her location and where she is. So the Fjordans seem to know a lot about the Darkling, and the one specifically that is trying to kill Alina would rather try to kill Alina to keep her away from the Darkling than try to run away from the Darkling, because he knows that either way, if he kills her, if he doesn't, if he runs, if he stays, he will be killed. So the Fjordan actually says about the Darkling that the Darkling will not have the witch. He will not have this power too. So that's kind of an interesting sentence to kind of get there. Tells you something about the Darkling, perhaps. And then the Fjordan goes to stab her, and it seems, because obviously this is Alina's point of view, it seems like slow motion arc towards her chest. And Alina closes her eyes, and the Darkling makes arm movements, and he makes a dramatic clap. And when Alina opens her eyes, the man on top of her is in two pieces, and one of them is falling onto her.
Gross.
And she panics, like, understandably. And the Darkling says, "The girl rides with me. And I'm like, yes, yes. I love that trope.
Ah,
I love when like you're in such a rush that they both have to get on the same horse. And that's like, it's a trope in a lot of books, but I
mm.
still love it when you gotta put your arms around her so that you can ride together and get up close and
But also, like, he's being protective of her,
hmm. But
right?
it really kind of, and I don't think that it's our fault that we fell for the Darkling because it really makes you like it's a trope that makes you think, yes, this is the love interest. Like
Yeah.
that's always the way it goes. If you're on a horse together.
But all but also, like, it sets up so early this, like, the triangle, right? Like,
Hmm.
Alina with the boys she grew up with and the one that she always had a thing for versus the Darkling, who's, like, this super powerful, like, misunderstood, like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
uh, person. And, Alina has to pick which one she's gonna want. Like, it's sort of, it goes that way.
Yeah. I like it more than most triangles, I think, but I do fall for the Darkling. But Alina at this point says, so you do make mistakes. And she really just like says shit without thinking about it because like this is the most feared being in this universe. It's almost like a Diana Matthew moment back to our
Yeah.
first book. But he's less crazy, which says something. I don't know if crazy is the right word. He's less reactive, maybe. And he
Yeah.
says, of course he does, just not often. And he kind of almost already seems intrigued by her. Um, and he tells her, I did what I had to, because she's obviously still a bit traumatized by having a body split in half on top of her.
Like
So,
you would be.
it's not something that would be great.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they leave on the horse together, and he kind of calms her using his amplifying powers to make her feel sure and comfortable, like she kind of talked about before. And she falls asleep in his arms. And again, it's a trope that I love. Um, After the first day of riding together, I guess more people show up to escort them, and they, after this point, ride separately, which makes me sad in my tropey little heart.
Yeah.
But I guess it makes sense. Um, it's an uneventful journey, and they stop at one point, and Alina is obviously hella stiff. She hasn't really been on horseback like that, as most people haven't. And she washes her face in a stream, and she's kind of thinking about Mal and how a goodbye would have been awkward between them. And like what could she really say to him? And she thought in her head like, thanks for like, making my life bearable, and sorry I fell in love with you for a while there. And it just seems like such a relatable
Yeah.
sentiment. I really appreciated that moment.
Mm.
And she kind of like laughs about it and smiles, and the Darkling finds her at this point as she's smiling about something in her head. And I also find this kind of relatable because I'm like, of course. Of course he finds you now while you're smiling about something that is just ridiculous in your head. And I really enjoy the Darkling and Alina's banter. He's like a very powerful being, but he clearly is drawn to her, and it seems like more than just her power. He seems very interested in like the workings of her mind. She tells him that she isn't a Grisha, and he says that she doesn't understand at all and then refuses to explain. So she kind of like huffs off. Um, that night, like after they've eaten, the Darkling comes over to sit by her and gives her some Voss, which is like maybe whiskey like,
Hmm.
seems like. And he tells her she can ask questions. And her first is interesting. She asks how old he is. And he says that he doesn't know. And she's kind of shocked by this answer. She's like, how do you not know how old you are? And he asks her basically the exact same question. And she's like, shit, I don't know how old I am either
Mm.
because I was an orphan.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like throwing the parallels in between them. And I think it's on purpose, but also I think the Darkling is kind of trying to shove the like show her the parallels. Um, he does eventually tell her that he's about 120-ish, but he looks the same age as her. And 120 is longer than most Grisha's lives, but he, as the Darkling, lives longer than most.
Yeah, I think he says it's relevant to your power. So like
Mm.
he says that your power doesn't like take your life away, it enhances it. So the more
Mm-hmm.
power you have and the more powerful you are, the longer you'll live.
Which at this point, 120 is very old to look 17. So it's like,
Mhm.
how powerful is he?
Yeah, for sure.
So he asks, I guess she kind of brings up that she's heard a lot of stories about him, and he kind of asks what stories they are. And we kind of get a little bit about Grisha life outside of Ravka territory. So they aren't treated nearly as well in other places. The Fjordans, which are the ones that attacked the carriages, they burn Grisha as witches. The Kirch sell them as slaves. The Shuhan carve them up, seeking the source of the power. So many Grisha would obviously rather go to Ravka and
Mhm.
fight in this war where they are revered and powerful and feared really by commoners because it's better than the alternative.
Yeah.
This Darkling, so Darkling is just a title basically, like it's just the title for the kind of summoner he is. But he is apparently the strongest Darkling in generations, and we only know him as the Darkling. In the show, he's known as General Kirigan, but
Okay.
in the book, General Kirigan and the Darkling are two separate people. It's
Oh.
yeah, it's interesting. But Lena also tells him that she heard a rumor Darklings are born without souls and they must be evil since a Darkling created the fold. And like, this seems like the most awkward conversation to ever have.
Yeah, I'm
But
not here for it.
I'm proud of her for just going for it. Like,
Yeah.
I guess she got drunk off the kvass. Like,
Either that or she's been hanging around with dudes too much.
well, could be that too. Um, Most soldiers that Alina knows in the army don't trust Grisha and have no allegiance to the Darkling, which is definitely interesting because they're clearly powerful and you would kind of want them on your side. So you'd think that you would be trying to make friends with them, but not the case. So this Darkling kind of says that his great 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 grandfather, whose nickname is the Black Heretic, is the one that created the Shadowfold, and it was a mistake. It was selfish and greedy, and every Darkling since has tried to undo it, including him. So that's a quote from this Darkling. And she is the first glimmer of hope he's seen in a while, and maybe a real solution to the fold. He also says the age of Grisha is coming to an end since weapons are getting more advanced and they need the fold gone so West and East Ravka are united again. So they have a moment in the show where Mal talks to, I guess, one of his commanders, and he's like, we need to go after Alina. And the commander is like, when I first joined the army, they said that Grisha were worth 50 to one of us. And then firearms came around, and then they said Grisha were worth 20 to one of us. And he's like, eventually, we'll all be worth the same because we'll have the military power. And I think that was kind of a nod to this conversation.
For sure.
Um, yeah. But Alina can't get over the Darkling chopping that guy in two.
Well, like,
Um,
he was literally trying to kill her. Like, appreciate that somebody saved your life. Come on.
right? And like if he had used a gun, and I think she even says it in the book, she's like, if he had used a weapon, it would have been fine. But the
Yeah.
fact that it was like just his mind, basically his powers, that's what really was scary. And that's like that seems like a you problem, not a actual problem. But anyway, they get to Ozalta and there's like a massive gate and dual walls to protect of protection. And the first ring or wall is basically a marketplace. But once you cross the bridge to get through the second wall, it's basically like all wealthy people and they're all like protected within this second wall. Um, the king's symbol we see is a double eagle, and Ozalta Pravka's capital has long been at war. The Grand Palace is the king's winter home, and it's basically in front of the Little Palace, which is where the Grisha stay. And spoiler alert, the Little Palace is not little. They call
But
it the Little Palace.
also, I like that, like, they have a little conversation as they're walking past the big palace, and, like, the Darkling is like, how do you like it? Like, what do you think of the palace? And she's like, oh, it's nice. And he was like, I hate it. I think it's so ostentatious and ugly. And she's like, well, yeah, it kind of is.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then they see the Little Palace, and she's like, I don't understand why they call this little. This just seems foolish. Like it's not small. So she's basically taken up a million stairs, she feels like, to get to her room. And she is exhausted and doesn't want to walk up these stairs. When she gets up there, she declines a meal. And as the, I guess, maid that brought her there is leaving, she tells her to lock her door. And she's kind of like, why do I need to make sure the door is locked? And I guess it's kind of like maybe some foreshadowing in a way. And she goes to bed.
If I got a cool night like that, I would not be able to go right to bed.
No, there's a lot happening. Just one last, I guess, note on the show is that I love the crows, but this book isn't about them. So I don't feel like we should talk about them too much. But in the show, Jesper is the funniest character, and I love him so much. I'm very excited for the second season.
Yeah, I really didn't understand, like, when I was reading about the show coming out, and they were saying how it was going to be a combination of the two
Mm-hmm.
series. I really had no idea what that was going to look like.
Well, yeah, I agree. Because when I read the books, like it's very obvious that Six of Crows happens after all of the Shadow and Bone trilogy. But based on the end of season one, I kind of think they're going to get into the plot of the first Six of Crows book in season two, which I would be very okay with.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So, I guess that wraps us up for this week. If you want to get in touch with us and share your thoughts on anything you heard in our episodes, or if you have any book suggestions, you can email us at coffeeandcoread@gmail.com. And be sure to check us out on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Coffee and Co Read.
So next week, we'll be reading the second part of Shadow and Bone. That's chapters 6 to 11, and we'll be talking about the next little bit of the show as well. Make sure to follow along. And if you're enjoying our little chats, don't forget to follow, rate, and review wherever you find our content. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you in the next page.